What's up, fellas? Welcome back to the shop. It has come to our attention, trying to build the men that are going to build the new Christendom, is that you guys would like to implement some kettlebells in the pursuit of getting stronger, getting a little bit more functionally fit. And so we're going to address that today. Hopefully this background noise is not too loud. I have a metal roof on my shop and it's raining outside. So it sounds like I'm inside an empty tin can. All right, so the point of the video today is to address two main principles and then a third one that I've tacked on, and how those things exactly apply to kettlebell training. We'll go over some basic movements that you're going to want to start learning how to master with the kettlebell, and then we'll also cover some programming, how to combine those movements together to achieve the desired result of additional strength and functional fitness. A couple of things first. Just to review past principles, we've talked about this before in some principles of training, but the main things that we want to worry about here are gaining strength and building muscle in workouts. The reason that we say that is because most of your calories burned throughout the day are not going to be burned while you're working out anyways. If you guys are meeting the minimum requirements, you're doing 15 minutes of a workout every day or 6 days a week, and so you're going to burn most of your calories outside of that workout when you're at rest anyways. The point of your workouts is not just to burn calories. Will that happen? Yes. But the main point of your workouts is to build muscle and strength. Really, we're saying the same thing in two different ways there. But if you can stress a ton of muscle tissue and get out of breath doing it, those are the main things we're worried about in a workout. So you can use kettlebells to do that, absolutely. But the first principle of kettlebell training is that the same thing applies whether you're using kettlebells or you're using a barbell or you're using machines in a commercial gym. Doesn't matter. Mechanical tension and repetition are the main things that you have to have. Those are the essentials for gaining strength, becoming more functionally fit. Those are the imperatives. It's really simple. Mechanical tension, repetition. So we're going to apply those exact same principles to the kettlebells. Number two, many of the kettlebell movements that we're going to be talking about today are full body movements, which means they're not isolation movements. They require a lot of power generation, which means a lot of body awareness and coordination. So don't get frustrated if you cannot pull this all off on day one. That's all right. Instead of isolating individual muscle groups, we're going to be using a system of muscle groups, right? So the way the body was actually designed to work to generate force and power. So instead of using a simple isolation movement, maybe something like a bicep curl or a lateral shoulder raise, these are going to be movements that involve a chain of muscle groups, which means there's a system involved. All of these things have to fire in sequence at the right time, and there's a bit of an art to it. That's a good thing. What we're actually developing here is athleticism. I know this is not used in the fitness world a lot today, but we want to be athletic. This is something that you can achieve through something like kettlebell training. It's not the only way to do it, but it is a good way to do it. Kettlebell training can be a bit of an odd object thing, right? They're lopsided weights. It's kind of awkward if you've never done it before, and so this is a good way to develop some athleticism. That's a good thing. Because we're going to be able to use strength and athleticism and affect both of those things at the same time in the same program, kettlebells is a great way to develop your actual work capacity as a human being, which is exactly what we want to do. We want to be stronger. We want to be more capable. We want to be able to do more work with less energy, and we want to be harder to kill. The third principle that I want to hit here and very quickly is just that you should have fun with this. Kettlebells are weird. It's fun to get into. They're supposed to be fun. It should not be drudgery for you to come in here and do your workouts. And this applies to anything that you're doing. All of your training should not be drudgery every single day. If that's how you feel in the gym, please reach out to us. We want to help you. You should learn to actually enjoy this process. It should be fun. Using your body that God designed and gave you is an enjoyable thing. This should not be miserable every time you walk in the gym. So remember, have fun. If you don't get every single set done exactly the way that you want to, good. That means you're actually challenging yourself. So here we go. The first thing I want to talk about is the size of kettlebells that you should get, the type of kettlebells you should get. These are super cheap Amazon bought kettlebells. I've had them for years. They've held up just fine. I have a 70, and I have a 30. I would like to get a medium-sized kettlebell to fit between these two, maybe something like a 53, a 50-pounder, somewhere in there. But I haven't done that yet. It's been fine. I use the 70 for as much as I can possibly use it for, and when I need to, I use the 30. So this is up to you, but my recommendation, if you're going to get two kettlebells, a lot of the popular thing online right now is to have two kettlebells the same size, have two 35s, have two 53s, whatever it is, and you're doing double hand kettlebell work. There's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. But I think you get a whole lot more bang for your buck, a lot more variation if you have two different size kettlebells. So maybe a 35 and a 53, or maybe a 53 and a 70, or maybe something like my setup. But anyways, the main thing here is don't overcomplicate this. These are literally just hunks of steel with a handle on it. Okay, it's not complicated. You don't have to have super nice kettlebells to get started. Don't let things like that be a barrier of entry for you. Let's go over some movements. The very first thing that we're going to talk about is really, really simple. It's the most basic lift in the world, but it's just a deadlift. All we're going to do is take both hands and stand up just like you would with a barbell, right? The exact same thing, but with a kettlebell. There's multiple ways to do this. If you have two that are the same size, which we just talked about, you can obviously go one on each side. I really like doing more awkward lifts if you have the equipment. So doing different weights in each hand and then switching the weights back and forth. Maybe you do a set of 5 like this, and then you switch and do a set of 5 the other way. But that's an awkward, a lot more functional, which is this word that we're using a whole lot. It's a lot more real world applicable is what that means. So this is awkward because there's 40 more pounds in this hand than there is in this hand. Then you simply switch them and you do the same thing, right? But the very first movement is a deadlift. If you have smaller kettlebells and you're saying to yourself, deadlifting 25 pounds is not really that difficult, I'm not going to deadlift my kettlebells. Probably a good point. Some ways that you can make this more difficult, just to add some variation here, is you can do single leg. You can just touch your toe down behind you for balance, or pick it all the way up, and you're doing single leg deadlifts if you have a smaller kettlebell, just to add some difficulty. You can do that on the same leg. You can do that on opposite legs. You can do that however you want, but it'll add some variation to the movement. So, kettlebell deadlift. The next movement we're going to talk about is the bent over row. You can start with the dumbbell between your feet and row here. You can stand with the dumbbell outside the feet, row here. Both are difficult. Both work. Something you can do if you have two kettlebells is called the gorilla row. You'll see Alex do these quite a bit. But you're standing with feet shoulder width apart. You're taking one and rowing. Take the other and row. You're using the opposite hand as a brace to brace yourself. Just like that. If you have two different size kettlebells, obviously you want to switch hands somewhere in there. Maybe do 5 on one side, 5 on the other. If you have lighter kettlebells and rowing them is not difficult for you at all, something you might think about is something like an upright row. Holding the top of the kettlebell, driving both elbows up and out, upright row. So, bent over row, gorilla rows, upright rows. The next thing I want to talk about is the goblet squat. So you're going to be holding the kettlebell in a front rack position with both hands and doing a full squat. All right? Some of you guys are struggling with your squat position. This is a great way to improve your squat mobility. If you have bad mobility in your hips and ankles, the thing that wants to happen is your knees can't track over your toes, so you get stuck here, and then your hips have to fall way far back, and then you can't get into a full squat. Something that you can use the kettlebell for is a counterbalance in that squat position. So you can get more weight out in front of you. You can hold this however you want. I've seen guys do it this way. I've seen guys do it this way. It doesn't matter. Figure out what works best for you. So if you got the kettlebell in the front rack position, you're going to drive your hips down and back, knees track over your toes, full depth squat. And what you can do here is if you're having a problem getting into that full depth squat, move the kettlebell further forward. The more counterbalance you have, the more you can keep your spine neutral and in an upright position. All right? So if you're struggling with your squat, kettlebell out front, hips down and back. Allow them to sit down between your ankles, and that's a goblet squat. Some other things you can do here, just to add some variation. If you want to do single arm, you can do these with cleans, you can do it however you want, but you can have this in a front rack position, like so. You can support it if you need to. So here you're adding some side-to-side tension. It makes the core work a little bit more. You could do however many reps on the right side, then switch things over. Do the same number of reps on the other side. So you can do those however you want. You can really be creative with this. I've seen guys do clean into a squat. I've seen guys do flip and then goblet squat. I've seen guys go from a kettlebell swing into a front rack catch and press. There's 1,000 different things you can do with just those simple movements by combining them in different sequences. The next couple of movements that I want to cover are the kettlebell clean and the kettlebell snatch. These are very similar movements. You'll see why I combine them together here in just a second. With the kettlebell clean, I like to start with the kettlebell on the ground out in front of me. I'll pull two, right? So begin the swing. Once I pulled through, I'm going to go elbow up and in, just like this. So you're pulling that weight up and letting the kettlebell swing around your hand and wrist, catching it on the shoulder. That's a kettlebell clean. Just like that. The next movement is exactly the same, except we're going to finish overhead instead of in a front rack position. It'll look like this. That's a kettlebell snatch. Now, you're going to notice when you start throwing these things around that you will at some point smash this into your wrist. It's going to happen. It's okay. The thing that you want to do is meet the kettlebell where it is. Don't let it come to you. You go to it. You'll notice you have to have kind of a tight grip on the pull, and then as the weight becomes kind of weightless and it's floating, then you loosen your grip, allow it to rotate around, and you go around and meet it. Same thing with the clean. Here, let it rotate around. Catch it with your shoulder. With the snatch, just like that. So that's the clean and the snatch. The next movement that I want to talk about with the kettlebell is probably something you've all already seen before, but that's okay. We're going to cover it anyways, and that's just a standard kettlebell swing. There's actually two different variations of these. One is what I've always been taught is the Russian and the American swing. The Russian will stop about head height, about even with your eyes, and the full American kettlebell swing or a full kettlebell swing will end all the way overhead. The way I like to do these, I set up with my feet just a little bit outside shoulder width. You want to have plenty of room for the kettlebell and both of your arms to come between your knees whenever you're in that downswing, and then you're generating power up and through. This is primarily a hip and leg drive movement. There's some shoulders involved, but it's mostly legs and hips. You'll notice if you're doing these in very high reps, it's also going to work your grip really hard. But like we said toward the beginning, a lot of these are full body movements. You're going to have a whole chain, a whole sequence of muscle groups that are triggered during, triggered may not be the right word, triggered, engaged, however you want to say it. A whole sequence of muscle groups are going to be involved in a lot of these movements. So look something like this. I'll pull to me to get the swing started. I'll start with the kettlebell out front of me. Something I see a lot of people do is the very first thing is they step up and they step right on top of that kettlebell. You don't have any momentum from here. You're going to have to pick it straight up, and now you have nowhere to go. So start with the kettlebell out in front of you just a bit. That way you can pull to you and then drive up and through. This is a Russian kettlebell swing. This is an American or a full kettlebell swing. Looks just like that. The last thing that we're going to talk about today as far as movements go with the kettlebell is the kettlebell press. So there's, just like all the other movements, multiple variations of this. You can push press, you can push jerk, or you could just strict press the kettlebell. Most of you will be strict pressing. I recommend starting there. It's a good place to start. That's the most fundamental of the movement. So you're going to have the kettlebell in a front rack position, feet about hip width apart. You're going to engage your core and your glutes. You don't want all this stuff to just be slack when you go to press. Engage everything, big breath in, brace, and then you're driving up and through. just like that. If you want to push press this thing, you would dip and drive with the legs and hips, just like this, driving all the way to full extension overhead. Catch, dip again, just like that. You've got a heavier kettlebell, like this one. You can grab front rack position and then push jerk. See how I re-dip? So your dip, drive, re-dip, catch and stand up. That would be the push jerk, which is the most advanced one. Takes the longest to learn, but you can also move the most weight with that technique. But a good way to get really good at it is the kettlebell push press, the kettlebell press, and just hammering on those basics. You can obviously take this and just press it from laying down as well. You don't have to be standing up. You could be laying and do a floor press with the kettlebell. Same exact thing, one side, pressing up and through, just like that. So there's a million different ways you can combine all those things. I'll show you guys one iteration of what you could do, combining some of those movements together. Typically, I'll pick 2, maybe 3 movements. You don't have to have a bunch. I'll combine that with some gymnastics or some running or whatever you want to do. But something as simple as a minute of kettlebell swings, a minute of burpees, and repeat that for 3 or 4 rounds is absolutely brutal. And it's the simplest workout in the world. But it's just grunt work. It's very difficult, extremely high intensity. Heart rate's going to be through the roof. And you're going to work a ton of the muscle groups in the body, basically all of them, with just those 2 movements. It's that easy to put kettlebell workouts together. Hopefully this is helpful, guys. Stay after it. Keep training hard. Don't overcomplicate this stuff. Doesn't have to be complicated to be effective. The basic biblical principle of simple obedience applies here. Show up, do something every day. Hope that helps. Y'all be well.